Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Midweek Study. My name is Timothy Barrett, and I'm the one tasked with, I don't know if I'm tasked with it, I chose to live stream on Wednesdays, Midweek Study. So, glad you are viewing this video and a part of this series. If you go to the Bradford Christian College YouTube channel, you will find the Midweek Study playlist, and you can find all of the episodes that we've done so far. It says we're doing number 16, and I think that's number 16 in the whole series, like the whole midweek study series, not number 16 on the emotional life of our Lord. I'm pulling up. Yeah, so we started the emotional life of Jesus, number 12. So numbers 12 through 16 now are the emotional life of Jesus, or as the article, the chapter, I guess, that B.B. Warfield wrote is titled The Emotional Life of Our Lord. And we've gone through Roman numeral 1 of that chapter, and we are set to begin, or we began last time, Roman numeral 2. Roman numeral 1 was really taken up with the most often attributed emotion to Jesus, that of compassion. And that's what that Roman numeral 1 mostly dealt with, was compassion. Here, in Roman numeral 2, B.B. Warfield takes up the idea of indignation and anger. Okay, and we can see that highlighted here, indignation and anger. Let's just kind of review to get a sense of what we're talking about here. So the moral sense, it's not merely a faculty of discrimination between the qualities which we call right and wrong, which exhausts itself in their perception as different. The judgments it passes are not merely intellectual, but what we call moral judgments. So the moral sense, it's what springs from that is moral judgments involving approval or disapproval according to the qualities perceived. And then Warfield makes this important statement here. It would be impossible for a moral being to stand in the presence of perceived wrong, indifferent and unmoved. And so what do we mean by a moral being, or what does Warfield mean by a moral being? A being perceptive of the difference between right and wrong and reacting appropriately to right and wrong perceived as such. The emotions of indignation and anger belong, therefore, to the very self-expression of a moral being in the presence of wrong. Okay, so these emotions here, indignation and anger, that's when in the presence of wrong. Okay. And let's see, we did read some more here. Okay, so and so he points out here that Jesus, living in the conditions of this earthly life under the curse of sin, could not fail to be the subject of the whole series of angry emotions. Right? And then Warfield points out that he says it's interesting to note in passing, especially in the Gospel of Mark, which rapid and objective as it is in its narrative, is the channel through which has been preserved to us a large part of the most intimate of the details concerning our Lord's demeanor and traits, which have come down to us that we find these records. And what was particularly interesting about that is that our Tuesday live stream, Lantern's Quest, Exploring a Sketchbook of Christ, is looking at working through the Gospel of Mark. And so there's a connection here between these two life streams. It is Mark, for instance, who tells us explicitly that the insensibility of the Jews to human suffering exhibited in a tendency to put ritual integrity above humanity, filled Jesus with indignant anger. Okay, now, I'm going to guess that if you're somebody who attends church regularly, you will probably have a hard time remembering a sermon in which the pastor expanded on, taught about the indignant anger within Jesus. Probably most Christians today would shudder to hear indignant anger and Jesus put together. Now, maybe not. Maybe a good number of Christians would hear that and think, oh, well, yeah, you're talking about cleansing the temple. You're talking about when Jesus cleansed the temple. Well, the reference here is Mark 3:5, okay? And in Mark 3:5, we're not in the temple, we're in a synagogue. And in that synagogue is a man with a withered hand, and it's the Sabbath day. And Jesus puts the question to those who were there watching him. And they were there specifically watching Jesus to see if he would heal on the Sabbath because, see, those who were watching him were insensible to human suffering, but they were not insensible to their ritual integrity. Okay? In fact, so those who were watching Jesus, it was in the synagogue, Mark 3:5, those who were watching Jesus, they were more concerned about ritual being maintained than this poor man with a withered hand. And in verse 5 of Mark 3, when he had looked around on them with anger, this he here is Jesus. In fact, let me go ahead and bring it up so you can follow along. When he had looked around on them with anger, he being Jesus, being grieved for the hardness of their hearts. You see, that's the description of Jesus' indignant anger, right? So this isn't him whipping people, flipping tables over, right? This is him in a synagogue. And he's got a bunch of people who are uber concerned that he might violate the integrity of the ritual of their Sabbath by performing work. And there's a poor man with a withered hand, right? So this insensibility of these individuals as they cared more about their ritual integrity than humanity. And Jesus was filled with indignant anger. Right, back to our text here. A man whose hand had withered met with in the synagogue one Sabbath afforded a sort of test case. Right, and so he talks about, we read this last time, he talks about that episode, which we just talked about. But, says the narrative, they kept silent. They didn't want to answer the question. What was the question? Right, well, here's the question right here. Is it lawful to do good or to do evil on the Sabbath, to save life or to kill? Okay, now, I don't think that's a hard question, right? Right? I mean, wouldn't you think that the obvious answer is, well, of course it's lawful to do good on the Sabbath? Like, I mean, my choices are to do good or to do evil. I might think that no, you should do nothing on the Sabbath. But I mean, even if I thought you should do nothing on the Sabbath, in doing nothing, you're doing good, right? Because you're doing what you're supposed to do on the Sabbath, right? So it just seems to me like it would be, you don't, I don't think you have to be a scribe or a Pharisee to be able to answer that question. But this is how complicated we sinful humans can make things, right? Like, just the general idea, is it lawful to save life or to kill? Well, obviously, saving life is a good thing. Now, killing under most circumstances is a bad thing, probably, right? I mean, we can all make up a scenario in our head where, that's like the option of last resort to defend someone, or that sort of thing. But I would take this kill here as the Ten Commandments: thou shalt not kill, right? But we can take these things that in and of themselves, we can say, oh yeah, well, that's the right thing to do. But then we can throw them into something, well, you got to think about this now, because you don't want to violate whatever. And suddenly something that should be an easy yoke to bear, right? Do good on the Sabbath. And sometimes in doing good, you have to get a little bit dirty, right? You have to get into the ditch and help your neighbor get their cow out, or their donkey, or whatever, right? You have to pull over and help somebody change a flat tire, right? You do good. Oh no, but we're going to be late for church. Well, okay. But these people who are watching, and in fact, in that chapter 3 of Mark, they're not just watching Jesus. They want to see if Jesus is going to heal on the Sabbath. And they're not just watching to see if Jesus is going to heal on the Sabbath, but they want to accuse him of something, right? That's what verse 2 of Mark 3 says. They watched him to see if he would heal on the Sabbath, that they might accuse him, right? So that's why they keep silent, because they're going to lose their ability to accuse him of anything if they answer that question. And so they kept silent. In the Webster Bible, verse 4, it says they held their peace. Just another way to say kept silent. And then verse 5 in the Webster, and when Jesus looked around on them with anger, and that's where B.B. Warfield writes, then Jesus' anger rose. He looked around at them with anger, being grieved at the hardness of their heart. What is meant is not that his anger was modified by grief. His reprobation of the hardness of their hearts was mingled with a sort of sympathy for men sunk in such a miserable condition. Okay, so so what Warfield is suggesting here is that Jesus' anger is directed at the circumstance that has brought these people to be so insensible regarding humanity and so taken with their ritual, the integrity of their ritual. Okay. In fact, Warfield goes on to say, what is meant is simply that the spectacle of their hardness of heart produced in him, that is, produced in Jesus, the deepest dissatisfaction which passed into angry resentment. Okay, now that that strikes me, to say that Jesus had resentment. Webster, about this word, he essentially calls it a synonym of anger. He says this word usually expresses less excitement than anger, though it is often synonymous with it. It expresses much less than wrath, exasperation, and indignation. In this use, resentment is not the sense or perception of injury, but the excitement which is the effect of it. Okay, so the excitement of passion which proceeds from a sense of wrong offered. The footnote, I guess it's this footnote here. The preposition, okay, I will not bother with that. That looks too complicated to deal with. All right, so thus the fundamental psychology of anger is curiously illustrated by this account. For anger always has pain at its root and is a reaction of the soul against what gives it discomfort. It is, James Denny says, anger is the vehement repulsion of that which hurts. Okay, so that's, I highlighted that because I thought that was a really, really nice descriptor of anger. And, it could be valuable, anybody who's in a counseling situation or just, analyzing your own circumstance where you have a sense of anger towards something. This could be really helpful to consider. Anger has pain at its root and is a reaction of the soul against what gives it discomfort, right? And so if I know that, then I have a sense of being angry. It may not be wrong to be angry. Jesus isn't wrong to be angry. Jesus has anger without sin, right? The thing we don't want to do is misdirect anger, right? And so if anger has pain at its root, there's something that's causing that pain. And that's what we want to make sure we identify. What's causing the pain that's giving rise to this anger? The hardness of the Jew's heart, vividly realized, hurt Jesus. Okay, so right there, I you know, I certainly don't want to be responsible for hurting Jesus, right? So what was the pain that gave rise to the anger? Well, the pain was the hardness of the Jew's heart that brought pain to Jesus. And within Jesus, anger rose in repulsion of the cause of his pain. And so he's angry at the hardness of the Jew's heart. Now, if we go back up here, and I know I'm recovering what we did last episode, and maybe I should have just said, go watch the last episode if you want to understand this here. But I'm into it now. When Warfield writes, then Jesus' anger rose, he looked around at them with anger, being grieved at the hardness of their heart. And his anger, what Warfield says, his anger was not modified by his grief. Okay, his reprobation of the hardness of their hearts was mingled with a sort of sympathy for men sunk in such a miserable condition. And so Jesus is capable of two emotions simultaneously, both of them with a particular object in mind. The anger rises from the hurt that the hardness of their heart causes, but the grief, right, in being grieved, is because of the sympathy for these men who are in such a miserable condition that that's what they've come to, right? They have sunk into the miry pit of sin, and this is what comes out of them. I say them, but because there are particular people in this particular episode that's being talked about, but it's sinful people, right? It's you and me too. There are thus two movements of feeling brought before us here. One, there is the pain which the gross manifestation of the hardness of heart of the Jews inflicted on Jesus. And two, there is the strong reaction of indignation which sprang out of this pain. The term by which the former feeling is expressed has at its basis the simple idea of pain and is used in the broadest way of every kind of pain. Okay, so we're getting into the new material here. Sorry, I bumped my microphone there. The term by which the former feeling, so that's supposed to be a number one right there. So that's the pain, which the gross manifestation of the hardness of heart the Jews inflicted on Jesus. The term by which the former feeling is expressed has as its basis the simple idea of pain and is used in the broadest way of every kind of pain. Okay, so in verse 5 of Mark 3, I'm bringing up my Greek. To afflict jointly, I think is the word. Let me switch. You can see right here, to afflict jointly, this word, Strong's number 4818G in the Greek. To afflict jointly, that is sorrow at. Well, this is the be grieved, so let me take that back. We're looking at the pain, stupidity of the heart. And to look all around, he accompaniment desire to afflict jointly superimposition the stupidity as the hardness of the heart. Well, I think that's the word right there for the pain in Mark 5, but not being smart enough in the Greek, because I assumed that pain would jump out at us. Okay. Nevertheless, Warfield is saying that the term that indicates the pain, let me get back to our Warfield text. The term that indicates the pain is is the simple idea of pain. And as Warfield says, is used in the broadest way of every kind of pain, whether physical or mental, emphasizing, however, the sensation itself rather than its expression. Now, maybe if I, quit doing what I, you can comment and tell me to stop doing this. If I quit trying to figure things out and I just read a little further, maybe we'll find out. Let's see what footnote 38 tells us. See Schmidt, this pain, unlike the grief which the three following words express, a man may so entertain in the deep of his heart that there shall be no outward manifestation of it unless he himself be pleased to reveal it. All right, so that helps us. All right, back to our text here. It is employed here appropriately in a form which throws an emphasis on the inwardness of the feeling, of the discomfort of heart produced in Jesus by the sight of man's inhumanity to man. Okay, and I think that's worth taking note of, the discomfort of heart produced in Jesus by the sight of man's inhumanity to man. Interesting. All right, sorry. I'm still looking at the Greek. We'll see where Warfield takes us, and then we'll go look at it in just a moment. But I think I've said before in this series, if not other series, but certainly this series. I know I've said it in the Lantern's Quest, our Tuesday live stream, that of everyone post-fall, of everyone who's walked on this earth, the one who's walked on this earth and has been most human was the one who was also divine, and that's Jesus. Because to be fully human is to not be inhuman to humans, right? And Jesus, Warfield writes here, the discomfort of heart. But remember, we're talking about the pain in his heart, and apparently, what he's saying is that the pain that's expressed here is held inward, but it's a real pain that Jesus feels. The cause of that pain is man's inhumanity to man, as exemplified or typified in men being unwilling for a man who is suffering to be healed, right? Not just unwilling for him to be healed, but insistent that he not be healed at that time, right? So for them, you have a traveling doctor who happens to be in your town on that day, and he has the medicine, the equipment, the skill, the ability, the power to heal someone. But your inhumanity is such that, well, it's the wrong day, so you can't do it. Don't do it. In fact, for them, it would be a greater sin for you to heal this man on this day than for us to have any charge of inhumanity towards this man with the withered hand. Now, okay, I won't say anything. I looked ahead, and I'm going to avoid trying to explain something, and I'll let Warfield lead us there. So the expression of this discomfort was in the angry look which he swept over the unsympathetic assemblage. It is not intimated that the pain was abiding, the anger evanescent. Okay, so what does it mean to be evanescent? Does that mean to be like bubbling up? Evanescent? No. Vanishing, subject to vanishing, fleeting or passing away. Exact opposite of what I was just thinking. So it is not intimated that the pain was abiding, the anger evanescent. The glance in which the anger was manifested is represented as fleeting. So what he's saying is that It's fleeting in contrast with the pain of which the anger was the expression. But the term used for this anger is just the term for abiding resentment set on vengeance. And, this is just, it just sounds so strong in regards to our Lord. Like, again, I think for most Christians today, the only time they would associate anger would be the cleansing of the temple, I think. But this isn't the cleansing of the temple. There's a man with a withered hand in a synagogue. And other than, at least from the narrative in Mark, other than the inhumanity that lives within the hearts of these people who are watching to see if Jesus will do this dastardly deed of healing this man on the Sabbath so they can accuse him. Otherwise, I assume that things look pretty standard. Right? Like, I don't think that we have the impression that as people walk by or people are there, they're thinking, well, there's some bad stuff going on in here today. There's some stuff to really get angry about in here today. Because it wouldn't necessarily be the obvious thing. But there was something for Jesus to be rightly angry about, for Jesus to sinlessly have an abiding resentment that is set on vengeance. I mean, those are strong words. I mean, if we use that, if we describe ourselves or someone else in a circumstance as having those emotions, that's leading into some dangerous territory. Okay, so we have footnote number 39, which says, see Schmidt, and this word right here is wrath, as it is directed to punishment or vengeance. And that Greek word stands in closer relation to the vengeance which is to be inflicted than this other word. It accordingly can be nothing else than the violently outbreaking natural impulse, uncontrolled by the reason, which we call by the word wrath. And the idea that such an impulse seeks its end, and therefore the thought of vengeance or punishment which this impulse seeks to wreak on the guilty one, lies close. Now, maybe the same kind of thing is happening when Jesus is cleansing the temple. Maybe the same word is used there in regards to his emotion. We're not looking at that. I don't know who would read the story in Mark 3 of the man with the withered hand in the synagogue, and from that reading come to the conclusion that the anger in Jesus about what was happening there, at least what was in the minds and the hearts of those who were watching him closely to accuse him, that anger was of such a character or nature or intensity that it led him to the thought of vengeance, punishment, wrath. To release that on the guilty. Now, that word right there, I mean, if those are the Greek letters, right? If we think about those as English letters, it looks kind of like O-P-Y-N, right? Let's look at the Greek New Testament, and that word is right here, O-P-Y-N-S, O-P-Y-N. Notice it translation here is desire. Okay, now if we go to the Webster, when you looked around on them with anger, being grieved for the hardness of their hearts. The word desire doesn't show up there in the Webster. In the ESV, we looked around at them with anger. Right? It is that word that is giving us the English word anger. Okay, this to afflict jointly, this is the grief, right? If I click on this one, this is to be grieved. Okay. But this one right here, from G3713, properly desire as a reaching forth or excitement of the mind, that is, by analogy, violent passion, ire, or justifiable abhorrence, by implication, punishment, anger, indignation, vengeance, wrath. So these non-italicized words here, those reflect different ways this word is translated into the English. Now, I mean, Strong's is, I mean, clearly what we just read in that footnote was a much more rigorous digging into of this Greek word, right? So that shows, I mean, Strong's is helpful, right? And for many of us, that's what we have is Strong's. Can't really see Strong. Just notice that the way I've got this set up. But anyway, Strong's is helpful. But we can see from reading our footnote in the Warfield what a more rigorous digging into the sense of that word can lead us to. All right, so the term used for this anger is just the term for abiding resentment set on vengeance. So the next time you're in Bible study and you're reading this story, you might just want to point out that when Jesus looks around on them with anger, if you can remember this phrase, he is experiencing that impulse, which is producing the thought of vengeance or punishment, to wreak on the guilty. This is wrath that he's experiencing, that he's feeling. Okay, now let's read how a smarter man than me describes this. Precisely what is ascribed to Jesus then? Okay, so what is it that is ascribed to Jesus in this passage? That indignation at wrong, perceived as such, wishing and intending punishment to the wrongdoer, which forms the core of what we call vindictory justice. Or as the British might say it, how would they say that? Vindicatory justice. Vindicatory justice, maybe. Vindicatory justice. Justice that is vindicated. Footnote. The wrath of the Lamb, Revelation 6:16. Thomas Goodwin wishes us to understand that when such emotional movements are attributed to the exalted Christ, they have their full quality as human emotions. Okay, and there's more to read, but that's pretty significant right there. We were just talking about the fact that the most completely human person to ever walk on this earth is Jesus, the divine Jesus, right? And that's what Thomas Goodwin is saying here, that these emotional movements that are attributed to the exalted Christ have their full quality as human emotions, affecting the whole Christ body as well as spirit. Therefore, when as we read of the wrath of the Lamb, Revelation 6:16, namely against his enemies, as hear of his pity and compassion towards his friends and members, why should this be attributed only to his deity, which is not capable of wrath, or to his soul and spirit only? And why may it not be thought he is truly angry as a man, in the whole man, and so with such a wrath as his body is afflicted with, as well as that he is wrathful in his soul only, seeing he has taken up our whole nature on purpose to subserve his divine nature in all the executions of it. Right. So Thomas Goodwin is saying that we come to these emotional moments and we read about him being angry. We don't want to just say, well, that's some kind of divine anger only. We do want to understand that he was truly angry as a man. Now, he's sinless, right? So whatever he was experiencing as being truly angry as a man was righteous. Indicatory. Maybe the first time I've ever said that word. Let's go to the Webster's 1828, vindicatory. And the first word doesn't help me. Punitory, well, maybe it does, but punitory, inflicting punishment, avenging, tending to vindicate, justificatory. Okay, we're just using a lot of big words. The afflictions of Job were not vindicatory punishments. Okay, so they weren't punitory. That is, I take that to mean punitive, punitory, punishing or tending to punishment, right? But that makes me think of punitive damages, right? Like deserved, earned, right? So in that vindicatory definition, Webster was saying, Job, those punishments from God were not, or from the devil by God's permission, were not earned, right? They were, I mean, if you recognize Job as a type of Christ, right? Job has everything, it's all given up, and he lives the life he lives after that, only to be essentially rise up from the death of that life and then be exalted. I mean, all right. This is a necessary reaction of every moral being against perceived wrong. Wait a minute. I would like to be a moral being. Remember, a moral being is one who can perceive right and wrong and has the correct reactions, the proper reactions, you could say the godly reactions, when in the presence of right or when in the presence of wrong. And so here, against perceived wrong, the necessary reaction is that indignation at wrong perceived as such, wishing and intending punishment to the wrongdoer. That's the necessary reaction if a moral being finds himself in the presence of wrong. And anger that calls for justice to be done. All right. On another occasion, Mark 10:14, pictures Jesus to us as moved by a much lighter form of the emotion of anger. His disciples, doubtless with a view to protecting him from needless drafts upon his time and strength. This drafts right here would be things that draw on his time and strength. Okay. Things that take up his time, that use up his strength. Interfered with certain parents who are bringing to him their babies, that he should touch them. Jesus saw their action, that is the action of the disciples, and we are told that he was moved with indignation. The term employed here expresses originally physical and then mental irritation. Right now there's a footnote in there, 41. C. Schmidt again. And so these words designate the displeasure which we feel at an act in which we see a wrong or which outrages our human sentiment and feeling. Jesus was irritated by their hardness. Mark in 10:14 writes that Jesus was much displeased. Why was he much displeased? Because he saw his disciples rebuking those that brought the young children to Jesus, that Jesus should touch them. So Jesus was irritated, or perhaps we may better render was annoyed or vexed. Okay, so annoyed, we're probably familiar with that word. Vexed, I'm sure, is a word that it's maybe the first time you've heard it. I don't know. Wait, I thought I got to that word. Let me try again. Vexed. Teased, provoked, irritated, troubled, agitated, disquieted, afflicted. Okay, now that certainly doesn't sound like what we were reading, and definitionally what we were reading before about the anger that Jesus was expressed toward Jesus was with the man with the withered hand. Warfield here says that Jesus showed his annoyance, whether by gesture or tone or the mere shortness of his speech. Let the children come to me, forbid them not. (42) footnote. We hear the Lord's indignant call as it startles the disciples in the act of dismissing the party. Thus we see Jesus as he reacts with anger at the spectacle of inhumanity, so reacting with irritation at the spectacle of blundering misunderstanding, however well meant. Okay, so we have high degree anger at the spectacle of inhumanity. And again, when you think about that, okay, so Jesus did show anger at the spectacle of inhumanity, right? And you think about that as that's where Jesus is showing them the highest degree of anger, let's say. Again, the example that was given was the man with the withered hand in the synagogue. And I say that because, again, if we ever think about Jesus being angry, we always go to the cleansing of the temple. But the kind of anger that Jesus would experience or would arise within him that was like a step away from releasing wrath, he experienced at the synagogue with the man with the withered hand and those who were watching to see if he would heal that man because they wanted to accuse him. So we see Jesus as he reacts with anger at the spectacle of inhumanity, so reacting with irritation at the spectacle of blundering misunderstanding, however well meant. All right, so So think of the extreme difference, right? The disciples, the reason for the rebuke is that they think that they're being helpful, right? They're thinking our master is tired. He needs to rest. He can't be bothered by all of this. We're acting like kind of the buffer between him and these crowds of people, right? But their action of rebuking, let's say, the parents who were bringing the young children, is a blundering misunderstanding on their part. And yeah, it irritates Jesus. It is a low level anger. And Jesus' response is the short command: suffer the little children to come to me and forbid them not. And I'm certain that Jesus, in whatever gesture he may have used at that time, in his tone of voice, the look on his face, everything was perfect to show to his disciples, what you're doing is a blunder and it's irritating to me. And you don't want to irritate Jesus, right? I suppose I'm being a little bit facetious in that, but I'm certain that that intention came through clearly to the disciples. Now, in the other case, okay, so let's take the disciples' case. It could well be that at this point, part of what is the irritation to Jesus is my disciples haven't yet learned that it's okay, I can handle this. Learn from the woman at the well episode, right? When I sent you off for food and you come back and you see that I don't need food anymore because I'm doing the will of my Father. That is my food, right? Learn from that, disciples. But the anger with the man with the withered hand is heightened because of what has happened to the heart of men who are hardened in their sinful circumstance. All right, so we have two examples or two circumstances where we see Jesus expressing anger, one on the verge of wrath, the other at a much lower level in irritation with blundering followers. Warfield goes on. Yet another phase of angry emotion is ascribed to Jesus by Mark, but in this case, not by Mark alone. Mark 14:3 tells us that on healing a leper, Matthew 9:30, that on healing two blind men, Jesus straightly, strictly, sternly charged them, as our English versions struggle with the term in an attempt to make it describe merely the tone and manner of his injunction to the beneficiaries of his healing power, not to tell of the cures wrought upon them. Okay, so I'm sure that Warfield will flesh this out, but in okay, so Mark 14:3 can't be right. That is a mistake. It's not Mark 14:3. Mark 14:3 is a woman having an alabaster box of ointment, broke the box and poured it on Jesus' head. Um, So let's do a search. Oh, wait a minute. Mark 14:3. Let's talk about in the house of Simon the leper. But that's not the healing of the leper. I don't understand. Mark 1:40. Yeah, Mark 1:43. Okay. Live action editing here. This should really be Mark 1:43. We read of the leper being cleansed, and I'll see 1:43. You put the 1 and the 4, you get the 14, and then the 3 becomes the verse. But it's really 1:43. Anyway, this is it's interesting that it ends up being 14:3, and it mentions a leper in that verse. But anyway, Mark 1:43, and Jesus strictly charged the healed leper and forthwith sent him away. Matthew 9:30. Hopefully we don't have the same issue. We have to search around here. Matthew 9:30. And their eyes were open, and Jesus strictly charged them, saying, "See that no man knows it." And Warfield is saying our English versions of the Bible are really struggling here with the term. This term, footnote 43, this term right here, see especially the detailed discussion of this word by Gumlick in that work. It is now exegetically certain that Jesus here was angry. Only this open and vehement anger and no other meaning belongs philologically to that big word. So when I look at Matthew 9:30 and I go to the Greek, do I really see that big word? Yep, there it is. To have indignation on. Oh my. To snort with anger. And so in our footnote it says here, from what has been said, it is sufficiently clear that this word always expresses, transferred to man, nothing but the active affection of anger, never a general mental movement, least of all sorrow. 2, that moreover, this word, and is frequently heightened and yet at the same time interiorizing, intensive, expresses only a strong or the strongest degree of wrath, which precisely on account of this strength being incapable of being held in, breaks out externally, but still gives vent to itself rather in uncontrollable sound than words. And so that's why this definition here is saying to snort with anger, to sigh with chagrin. And so this word designates primarily a single emotion, and this one is a vehement ebullition of his anger. The words are never used otherwise than of hot anger in the classics, the Septuagint, and the New Testament, save when they denote snorting or growling proper. That's good to know. All right, so this vehement ebullition. I'm going to my Webster's. Ebullition. The operation of boiling. Really? The agitation of a liquor by heat which throws it up in bubbles, or more properly, the agitation produced in a fluid by the escape of a portion of it converted into an aeriform state by heat. Evolution is produced by the heat of fire directly applied, or by the heat or caloric evolved by any substance in which. So, given that, it sounds as though this word is like boiling over, right? So this is interesting. In Mark 1:43, not 14:3, but 1:43, and Matthew 9:30, there is this word that is used. It says here, this term, however, does not seem to mean in its ordinary usage to charge, to enjoin, however straitly or strictly, but simply to be angry at. Or, since it commonly implies that the anger is great, to be enraged with. Or perhaps better still, since it usually intimates that the anger is expressed by audible signs, to rage against. If we are to take it in its customary sense, therefore, what we are really told in these passages is that Jesus, when he had raged against the leper, sent him away. That he raged against the blind men, saying, "See that no one know it." That's going to make those verses very different, isn't it? This is challenging stuff here, right? When he had raged against the leper, he sent him away. He raged against the blind men, saying, "See that no one know it." If this rage is to be supposed, with our English versions, to have expressed itself only in the words recorded, the meaning would not be far removed from that of the English word bluster in its somewhat rare transitive use, as, for example, when an old author writes, "He meant to bluster all princes into perfect obedience." The implication of boisterousness and indeed of empty noise which attends the English word, however, is quite lacking from the Greek, the rage expressed by which is always thought of as very real. What it has in common with bluster is thus merely its strong minatory import. Wow, I'm learning a lot of new words today. Minatory. Threatening, menacing. Its strong, threatening import. The Vulgate Latin accordingly cuts the knot by rendering it simply threatened, and is naturally followed in this by those English versions, Wycliffe, Rains, which depend on it. Certainly, Jesus is represented here as taking up a menacing attitude. Jesus is represented here as taking up a menacing attitude, and threatening words are placed on his lips. "See that you say nothing to any man. See that no one knows it." A form of speech which always conveys a threat. Footnote 46. Well, it just gives a bunch of references there. But threaten can scarcely be accepted as an adequate rendering of the term, whether in itself or in these contexts. When Matthew tells us, "And he was enraged at them, saying," the rage may no doubt be thought to find its outlet in the threatening words which follow. So that Zahn is misled into explaining, "He admonished them in a menacing tone. Something more than this is said." Okay, so in the Matthew passage, all right, so if we go to the Matthew passage here, Matthew 9:30, their eyes were open and Jesus strictly charged them. What Warfield is saying, no, and Jesus was enraged at them, saying, and then here comes the threat. But the implication of Mark is different. And so we go to Mark, not 14:3, but 1:43. Mark 1:43. And he strictly charged him, and raging at him, or having raged at him, and he forthwith sent him away. He straightway sent him forth. Okay, so what he's saying, Matthew has words that follow that kind of fulfill that threatening part. Mark doesn't, right? So the implication of Mark is different, and raging at him, or having raged at him, he straightway sent him forth. When it is added, and saith to him, see that you say nothing to anyone, a subsequent moment in the transaction is indicated. Footnote 48. Meyer quite accurately connects. Yeah, so that's in verse 44. Sent him away and said to him, see that you say nothing to any man. So Meyer quite accurately connects this big word right here, which is snorting angry. Translating, after he had been angry at him, though he supposes this smaller word to have been accompanied by a vehement, begone now, away, hence, and accordingly arbitrarily paraphrases the rest of that, wrathfully addressed him. In Matthew 9:30, he accurately translates, he was displeased with them and said. How our Lord's rage was manifested, we are not told. And this is really just as true in the case of Matthew as in that of Mark. To say he was enraged at them, saying threatening words, is not to say merely he threatened them. It is to say that a threat was uttered, and that this threat was the suitable accompaniment of his rage. A threat was uttered, and that this threat was the suitable accompaniment of his rage. Okay, so again, to be clear, in Mark chapter 1, and I realize I'm going too long now, but in Mark chapter 1, 43, Jesus strictly charged him, or what Warfield is saying is Jesus raging at him, or having raged at him, straightway sent him forth. And then verse 44, saying to him, see that you say nothing to any man. And that threat was suitable, or suitably accompanied his rage. And the same is true for the Matthew 9:30 passage. Now, we're not through with this, what we're looking at here, but Warfield's going to go on with it. But I'm certain that this is like nothing. I mean, for me, it's like nothing I've ever encountered. Right? Like, and like, why? Why would this be the case, that there would be this rage? So we're going to have to, this is a great cliffhanger ending for this episode. So if you're watching, you now have to watch the next episode, which Lord willing will be next week, because we need to get more explanation about this rage with a threat, and Jesus is doing the work that we all know Jesus to do, healing people, right? Like, why would there be any rage at this moment? Why would he? This is fascinating. And Warfield is asserting that, remember, he said that our English versions really struggle with this, as our English versions struggle with the term here, specifically in Mark chapter 1, the healing of the leper, and in Matthew 9, the healing of the two blind men. Our English versions struggle. In fact, what he's saying is that the English versions struggle with it so much that they end up making it sound like a blustering, which is not I mean, when somebody blusters, bluster is used to refer to somebody that's kind of not really making sense about what they're saying and how they're acting, maybe, or the tone of their blustering, right? It's like, calm down. And we wouldn't think that of Jesus. So I'm eagerly looking forward to the next episode of this series to find out what is it that Warfield's going to bring us to, and understanding of what's happening here. Our Lord's rage was manifested. How our Lord's rage was manifested, we're not told. But he threatened them. And a threat was uttered, and that threat was the suitable accompaniment of his rage. What is going on here? We need to know. Well, Lord willing, join us next week, where we'll continue exploring this. Because I'm certain, well, I wouldn't, right? I wouldn't read these passages and think, oh yeah, clearly Jesus is enraged at this point. No. I mean, I'm sure that these passages, look at how compassionate Jesus is, the love that Jesus has, which is not wrong to say that Jesus has compassion. We've already read that in our article here. But you see, this, to me, this is a very wonderful example of the difference between reading into the text, because we want Jesus to be a loving person. We want him to be accepting. We want him, as one pastor said, we want Jesus to have a yes face, whatever that means. But if you want to be a rigorous Bible reader, don't be reading and insisting that at every moment Jesus be the type of Jesus that you think he should be. Read the Jesus that's in the story. And Warfield is helping us uncover that. And maybe we're a little bit frustrated right now because this doesn't feel like the Jesus that I've been told about. How are we going to reconcile this? Can we reconcile this? What are we going to understand from this? And so I'm leaving us at a great cliffhanger point, right? We must come back next week to find out more. And I hope you will. I hope you will join me. As Lord willing, next week we continue our study of the emotional life of our Lord. I hope you find the opportunity, whether joining me live next week or watching the video when you're able. Please like, share, and subscribe. That's how we can build a community. Leave a comment or two. That would be great. And yeah, that's our episode for tonight. And again, hope to have you join us next week.